There's a phrase running wild across the internet right now, shared with the kind of breathless confidence that makes people stop scrolling and actually believe it. Silver is going to the moon. And what's genuinely remarkable is that part of that statement is not a metaphor, not a motivational poster, not wishful thinking dressed in financial language. It is, in the most literal sense possible, physically true right now. But here's the problem. Most of the people repeating it are either inflating what it actually means or completely missing the deeper story underneath it. And the deeper story, the one that holds up when you actually pressure test it, is more compelling than the slogan ever could be. So today we're doing something that almost no one in this conversation is willing to do. We're going to slow down. We're going to take the phrase apart, separate what's real from what's theater, and figure out what's left when the hype burns off. I'll tell you right now, what's left is still genuinely interesting, but getting there requires patience. And in a world built on 5-second thumbnails and emotional clickbait, patience has become a legitimately rare thing to ask for. Welcome to the OG John AG. Drop a comment right now and tell me what day and date you're watching from. I always look forward to seeing where in the world this reaches you. Let's start with the mission itself, because this is not a rumor and it is not another delayed countdown story. NASA's Artemis II launched Wednesday, April 1st, from Kennedy Space Center in Florida at 6:35 in the evening, Eastern Time, carrying 4 astronauts on a planned 9.5-day journey around the moon and back. Commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, and mission specialists Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen are on track to set the record for the farthest distance any human beings have ever traveled from Earth, 252,000 miles. That is not a concept drawing. That is not a launch that got pushed again. Those 4 people are out there right now as you watch this, further from home than any crew in more than 50 years. The first crewed lunar flyby since Apollo. And that fact alone changes the entire tone of what follows. The first question most people ask is the obvious one. Okay, the mission is real, but is Silver actually on it? And the honest answer is, essentially yes, with an asterisk that almost everyone conveniently skips over. Official NASA documentation does not appear to provide a clean, specific inventory line reading, "Here is exactly how many ounces of silver are aboard Artemis II." Anyone presenting you with a precise figure as though they have insider knowledge should be treated with instant skepticism. What we can do is trace NASA's long, documented history with silver-based aerospace applications. Identify the categories where silver belongs in systems like Orion. And say with reasonable confidence that silver is woven into this mission's hardware story. But there is a meaningful difference between saying silver is involved and claiming to know exactly how much, exactly where, and exactly how it compares to every crewed spacecraft in history. That distinction isn't a weakness in the story. It's what makes the story credible. A story built on exaggeration is fragile. A story built on verifiable reality holds weight. So where would silver actually show up in a spacecraft like Orion? The first category is batteries. NASA has a long and well-documented relationship with Silver-Zinc battery chemistry going all the way back to the Apollo era. Silver-Zinc cells were selected for high-performance applications in early crewed missions because they deliver excellent energy density in a compact form factor. That is not a new revelation. That is not something that just appeared because someone designed a catchy thumbnail. Silver in space hardware is established historical fact. It has been showing up in extreme performance environments for decades. So when someone frames the Artemis-Silver connection as a stunning new discovery, that framing already contains a quiet deception, because the honest version is that this is a continuation of something deeply established, not the birth of something entirely new. And honestly, that continuation is more impressive than a one-time appearance. It means the metal keeps earning its place. That's considerably harder than simply being chosen once. The second category is electrical conductivity. Silver is the most electrically conductive metal on Earth. That's not marketing language. It's a physical property. In aerospace environments, where reliability, thermal tolerance, and weight constraints are all competing at once, materials get selected with ruthless precision. Engineers don't include something because it sounds good in a press release. They include it because leaving it out creates a problem they can't accept. Silver's conductivity keeps earning its consideration in high-performance electrical pathways because alternatives consistently underperform where the margin for error is zero. Think of silver less like the entire engine of a spacecraft and more like the specialist you call in when failure stops being an option. That framing is more accurate. It's also more honest about what the metal actually is. The third category surprises people, and it's worth sitting with. NASA technical work has examined ionic silver as a biocide in spacecraft water supply systems. In plain terms, silver ions can inhibit bacterial growth and biofilm formation in stored water, which is a genuinely serious concern for a life support system operating on a 10-day deep space mission. When you hear that framing, something shifts. Now we're not talking about silver as an abstract engineering component buried somewhere in a circuit board. We're talking about silver touching the systems that keep human beings alive beyond the atmosphere. That is not a meme. That is material science in the direct service of survival. Now here's a correction that keeps getting glossed over, and it matters. A significant portion of the commentary about this mission repeats the claim that Orion runs on fuel cells involving precious metals. The actual mission documentation from NASA makes clear that Orion's European-built service module draws electrical power from solar array wings, all 4 of which deployed successfully right after launch. That matters because entire chains of precious metals logic have been stacked on top of a technical assumption that doesn't match the actual hardware. When you start from the wrong system, everything built on top of that system inherits the error. Confidence built on a factual mistake isn't confidence, it's exposure. And the silver story doesn't need that kind of borrowed premise. It's strong enough standing on its own. Let's talk about what silver is actually doing in the market right now, because a moon mission discussed in a vacuum is symbolism dressed up as analysis. And symbolism without market context is just branding. As of April 2nd, silver was trading around $31 per ounce, pulling back roughly from the day prior. But zoom out even slightly, and the picture looks entirely different. 1 year ago, silver was sitting near $24 per ounce. That means anyone who held silver across the past 12 months has watched it gain significantly. Silver has had a dramatic run, reaching levels higher than at almost any point in the previous decade. And yet, here's a segment of the market talking as though a rocket launch is the catalyst that will finally wake this metal up. As if the move already in the rearview mirror somehow doesn't count. This is not financial advice, just analysis, so you can work through it yourself. That distinction between the price history that already happened and the price story being sold right now is critical. The people most aggressively pushing the moon-silver connection tend to speak as though silver has been quietly sitting in obscurity, waiting for this one moment of recognition. That is not the market we're actually looking at. Silver has already had a dramatic stretch. After a strong earlier run, prices pull back sharply at certain points before stabilizing in a contested range heading into April. That kind of movement is not a sleeping metal. That is a volatile, active, structurally contested market, one that rewards patience and precision and punishes people who arrive late, holding a headline as their only map. So what is actually driving silver beyond the mission? The answer requires holding several competing forces at once rather than collapsing them into a single clean story. Industrial demand remains the dominant structural narrative. Solar panel manufacturing continues consuming enormous quantities of silver per unit, And while engineers work continuously to reduce how much is needed per panel, the sheer volume of global solar build-out has consistently outpaced those efficiency gains. The same dynamic plays out in advanced electronics, medical devices, defense systems, and high-reliability electrical infrastructure. Silver doesn't appear in these applications by accident or sentiment. It appears because the performance requirements at the margins are brutal, and alternatives fall short. That's the honest industrial case. It's less exciting than a moon thumbnail. It's also considerably more durable. Here's a question almost nobody is asking loudly enough. Even if we accept that silver is aboard Artemis 2 in meaningful ways, batteries, electrical systems, water management, other hardware roles, does one mission actually shift the demand picture for a market of this size? And here we have to be careful, because the answer is nuanced in a way that requires holding two things at once. The first true thing is that the direct silver consumption of one spacecraft, however historic, does not represent a volume shock to global silver markets. One rocket is not a demand crisis. One launch is not a supply emergency. If that were the entire story, the appropriate response would be a modest footnote, not a whole category of YouTube content. But here is the second true thing, and this is where the interesting thinking actually lives. Silver plays two roles simultaneously: a store of value like gold during uncertain times, and an industrial metal powering solar panels, electronics, and electric vehicles. A mission like Artemis 2 does something to the public imagination that is genuinely difficult to price, but genuinely real in its effect. It forces both of silver's identities into the same frame at the same time. The same metal people stack in a safe for financial security is suddenly being discussed in the context of deep space life support systems and hardware trusted to bring 4 human beings home from beyond the moon. That convergence of narratives is emotionally powerful in a way that can accelerate attention among people who had never thought seriously about silver before. And attention, when a market is already structurally tight, is not nothing. It's not everything either, but it's not nothing. Let me encourage you to be genuinely curious here rather than either dismissive or gullible. The dismissive response says this is just symbolism. One rocket can't move a global commodity market, so ignore it. That response is technically accurate in a narrow sense and practically incomplete in a broader one. The gullible response says silver is literally going to the moon, so prices will explode by the weekend. That response is emotionally satisfying and analytically empty. The useful response sits between those two and asks a completely different question. Not what does this one rocket do to silver prices tomorrow, but rather, what kind of future does this mission point toward? If Artemis 2 is the beginning of a sustained return to crude deep space exploration, if it opens the door to more missions, more hardware, more life support systems, more advanced propulsion and power technologies, then the space angle becomes a compounding industrial story told in chapters over years, not a single headline told in hours. Artemis 2 is explicitly framed as a foundation for future lunar surface missions and eventually crewed journeys to Mars. That trajectory, if it holds, carries ongoing material demands that accumulate quietly in the background of a market already dealing with persistent tightness. That is the real question the smart money should be asking. Not what does April 1st mean for April 3rd, but what does the Artemis program's continuation mean for the next decade of precision materials demand? If you want analysis that actually holds up when you push on it, and if you're still watching this far in, smash that subscribe button on the OG John AG right now. Because the conversations we're going to be having going forward are not going to get less interesting. They're going to get considerably more so. Now let me say something plainly that rarely gets said in content like this, because plain speech tends to be bad for click metrics. The silver market in its current configuration does not need a moon mission to justify itself. It doesn't need a catchy slogan. It doesn't need the emotional velocity of a launch countdown to manufacture urgency. The structural story was already in motion long before anyone put Artemis in a thumbnail, and it will continue in motion long after splashdown. In late 2025 and into 2026, silver has reached levels driven by geopolitical developments, high demand, and supply shortages. That is the backdrop. The mission arrives on top of that backdrop, not as the foundation of it. Industry research continues to point toward ongoing global silver market deficits, what would represent roughly 6 consecutive years of the world consuming more silver than it produces. Supply is forecasted to rise, possibly toward decade-high levels in some projections. And yet forecasters still expect the market to remain tight overall because demand isn't sitting still either. Physical investment interest has shown signs of renewed strength after a softer period. Industrial consumption, while experiencing some cooling in specific categories, remains historically elevated in the aggregate. None of this requires a rocket to be true. All of it was already true before the countdown clock started ticking. The question was never whether silver's structural case existed. The question was whether enough people were paying attention to it. And that, curiously, is where the mission actually does something real. Stories shape attention. Attention shapes positioning. Positioning shapes prices, especially when a market is already structurally tight. This is not a mystical claim. It's how markets have always functioned. Narratives activate capital that was sitting on the sideline because the right catalyst hadn't yet arrived to give it permission to move. A crude lunar flyby, the first in more than half a century, is a remarkable catalyst for exactly that kind of narrative activation. Not because the rocket literally consumes a dominant share of annual silver production. It doesn't. But because it places silver inside one of the most watched human endeavors of the modern era in a way that is both literally real and symbolically resonant at the same time. That combination is genuinely rare. Stick with me here, because the solid-state battery conversation keeps surfacing in discussions around this mission, and it's worth handling carefully. There is legitimate and ongoing development work in advanced battery technology that involves silver in various formulations. Some companies are targeting meaningful commercial milestones over the next several years. That's real. But the distance between meaningful R&D progress and mass-market consumer adoption is not a straight line, and it is certainly not measured in weeks. Anyone using the spacecraft battery connection to imply an imminent consumer electronics revolution happening next quarter is running well ahead of the evidence. The direction is interesting. The timeline requires patience that most hype cycles are constitutionally incapable of sustaining. Track the development. Hold the idea. But don't build your entire framework around a timeline that hasn't proven itself yet. There's also a subtler point I want to make about what this mission represents from an engineering credibility standpoint, because I think it gets completely lost in the market conversation. Artemis 2 is not simply a trip to the moon and back. It is an explicit systems test designed to validate hardware, life support procedures, and crew return capability for future lunar surface missions. Among its core objectives, the flight is designed to demonstrate life support systems for the first time with actual crew aboard, establishing the foundation for sustained lunar presence ahead of missions to Mars. That framing matters for the silver story, because silver's reputation in engineering was never built on glamour. It was built on reliability in environments where failure carries no acceptable consequence. Think about what it actually means for a material to earn a place aboard a vehicle engineered to that standard. Nobody aboard that spacecraft tolerates anything that merely seems adequate. Every gram of every material in that vehicle was chosen because alternatives were found wanting, under the specific conditions that matter most. Silver is not there because someone appreciated how it looks. If silver is in those systems, it's because it performed when other options didn't. That brutal engineering endorsement carries weight that no press release ever could. So what's the real takeaway here? Not the slogan version, not the version built for shares and clicks, the version that survives a serious cross-examination. Silver has not suddenly become important because of Artemis 2. Silver was already important. This mission is a spotlight, not a discovery. Silver wasn't waiting in irrelevance for a rocket to rescue it. It's been woven into critical systems in advanced technology for a very long time, and the market around it has been tightening across multiple consecutive years of structural deficit. What Artemis 2 does uniquely, in a way almost no other event could, is force both of Silver's identities into public view simultaneously: the financial metal and the industrial metal, the store of value and the material of function. And it does this against the backdrop of a market that was already moving, already tight, already drawing serious attention from investors who don't need a slogan to explain why they're paying attention. If your entire case for silver depends on one rocket, that case is too fragile to hold. But if your case is built on persistent industrial demand, structural supply pressure, renewed physical investment interest, and the metal's documented habit of appearing wherever engineering standards are most unforgiving, then this mission is not the argument. It is the confirmation. It's the bright light shining on a corner of the case that was already standing on its own. Some analysts now forecast silver reaching the high 70s, with some projections potentially approaching $100 per ounce by the end of 2026. Targets that reflect structural supply-demand dynamics far more than any single launch event. Whether those numbers prove accurate will depend on factors that have nothing to do with one spacecraft and everything to do with the global industrial economy, monetary policy, mine supply, and investor behavior across many months and many markets. So, when someone says silver is going to the moon, literally, the phrase now has verifiable grounding. When someone says, therefore, silver prices must explode solely because of this one mission, that's when you ask them to show their work. Because the moment you ask for the work, the real conversation begins. Supply, demand, fabrication, investment flows, substitution pressure, macro conditions, physical market tightness. That is the conversation worth having. And the fact that a crude lunar mission just gave millions of people a reason to start asking the right questions about a metal they had barely thought about before, that, in a strange way, might be the most practically useful thing Artemis 2 does for silver. Not the silver it carries, the attention it commands. Whatever you think about this mission, mostly symbolic, mostly practical, or some powerful combination of both, tell me where you're watching from, what date you caught this, and how you see the story unfolding. The comments section here is genuinely worth reading, and if you got something real out of this breakdown, share it with one person you think is getting the viral version instead of the honest one. That is the most useful thing you can do, not for silver, but for the quality of thinking that actually keeps people ahead of the noise. This is the John A.G. Stay grounded. Stay curious.